My name is Nara, and I worked as a makeup artist. Since I had just graduated from college, it was difficult for me to find work because every position required experience. Following the recommendation of my friends, I went to see the funeral home director and applied for a job here to improve my skills. After talking with my family, my father advised me not to take the job because contacting the dead was not a good thing. I was a little hesitant in my heart, but anyway, the income of the job was quite good and I could comfortably practice on corpses. My workplace was a remote funeral home, and it was my job to make up the dead so they could be properly buried. Due to the specific job that required someone to be on duty 24/7, and I was the only woman here, so my colleagues also worried about me. They did not schedule a night shift for me to work. When I first started working, I was assisted by my colleague, so I gradually became accustomed to the job. Many of my friends began to avoid me during the time, claiming that I was eccentric for taking on the terrifying job. I had gradually gotten used to the type of work for over a year, and I felt like a brave and even strong woman who could do the job even at night. It was a gloomy evening, and when I left work, I usually cleaned my workspace to keep it neat and tidy. I was about to close the door to go home when I was startled by a sudden appearance that nearly made me scream. The girl immediately apologized for startling me. It was a girl around my age. She looked very shy with 2 braids. She wanted to ask me for a favor. When I asked her what she needed help with, she said she needed her makeup done. I was surprised because no one came to the funeral home looking for a makeup artist. So the girl said she was getting married soon and came here to ask for my assistance because she didn't have much money. The girl was also aware that bringing up such an unusual subject was a bit abrupt, and she was embarrassed to say it to me. The girl was dressed in an old outfit. I understood that society still had a lot of difficult people. The girl simply wanted to show her boyfriend how beautiful she was on her wedding day. The girl then smiled happily when she heard that I was willing to assist her and kept saying thank you. Then I took the makeup box and followed the girl to her house. The walk to her house was also difficult. It took more than an hour to get there. When she invited me into the house, she apologized profusely for allowing me to walk so far, but I didn't mind. I started opening the makeup box I had brought and prepared to do the girl's makeup. At the point, the girl introduced herself as Hama. I took out the makeup tools. These were the tools for applying makeup to the dead anyway. I still had to consult Hama before proceeding, and she agreed. I started carefully applying Hama's makeup after seeing what she didn't mind. When I applied makeup, I could see Hama's nervousness and tension on her face. All of a sudden, I noticed a black bruise on her neck. I worked in a funeral home for over a year, so I knew exactly what the scar was. Sweat poured down my forehead. My face was pale. I trembled. My heart panicked, as if it wanted to jump out. When Hama noticed that I had abruptly stopped applying makeup, she inquired me curiously. I quickly adjusted my breathing and emotions. I resisted the fear in my heart and continued to put on Hama's makeup, but my trembling hands revealed my inner fear. Then, because I was too shaky and couldn't make up anymore, I stopped. Hama then showed me the typical black trace of a corpse on her neck and said, "The trace scared you, right?" Then Hama lowered her head, a sad expression on her face, and told me her story. Hama said that she really wanted to marry her boyfriend, but a heartbreaking incident happened. It turned out that Hama had a boyfriend named Sam for over 5 years and was about to tell his family that they were getting married. However, after learning that Hama was an orphan, Sam's parents disagreed. Soon after, Sam decided to break up with Hama. Sam said she could find a new partner, but his parents only had one child, him, so he didn't want to disobey them. Sam decided to leave regardless of how much Hama clung or begged, and Hama desperately fell to the ground, tears falling non-stop. Hama felt as if the entire world had abandoned her, and even the person she loved the most had abandoned her. Hama stood on the cliff, looking at the scenery in the distance, thinking of Sam, tears welling up in her eyes. She had not expected Sam to treat her so cruelly. Hama did not hesitate, but chose to commit suicide by jumping off the cliff. There was no longer a Sam, no longer love, so her life had no meaning. Listening to the end of the story, I thought Hama was so pitiful. My tears fell because of Hama's story and also because of fear. Hama was now enraged. Her eyes were empty and I could see maggots crawling around her eyes. When I saw Hama's situation at that point, I jumped back in fear, leaned against a wall and shivered all over. I closed my eyes and I didn't dare to look at her, but from her voice I could hear her angry mood stemming from her hatred of Sam. All of a sudden, the surroundings became silent. I secretly opened my eyes and kept praying for her to leave quickly. But as soon as I opened my eyes, I regretted it. Hama was standing in front of me. I could even smell the stench coming from her mouth. I wanted to vomit. When I saw Hama's hideous face so close to mine, I stiffened all over. The ghost then asked me to make her beautiful so she could find Sam, but I advised her to let go of everything. When Hama heard my statement, she became enraged and grabbed me by the neck. Hama's hand strangled me tighter and tighter and I felt like I was suffocating. Then she let go of her hand, saying that if I put on good makeup for her, she would spare me. After Hama returned to her original form, I suppressed my fear and began applying Hama's makeup. After putting on the makeup, Hama looked at herself in the mirror and smiled happily. At that moment, I abruptly felt that Hama was really beautiful. Just as I was about to beg Hama to let me go, she blew a cold blast into my face. I fell to the ground and lost consciousness. I didn't know what happened to me after that. When I awoke, it was already morning, so I sat up and looked around, discovering that I had spent the night in the morgue with the body on the bed next to it. I slowly approached and looked at the body bag. My face turned pale immediately, because it was Hama, and her face had been meticulously made up. At the point, I was reminded of what had happened the night before, and the fear in my heart returned. I tried to control my fear and quickly opened the door of the morgue and ran out. As soon as I left the funeral home and returned home, I called the manager to ask permission to stay at home in the day. Just when I was thinking about whether to change jobs or not, the evening news on TV caught my attention. According to the afternoon news, on the day of the wedding, a groom named Sam repeatedly shouted in an insane state, then injured the bride with a bottle of wine, and then jumped to his death. I quickly turned off the TV, which gave me a severe headache, and of course, I knew who had done it. The next day, I decided to quit my job and applied for a position at a bridal makeup shop, hoping that I would never have to go through anything like that again. One day in early spring, in my peaceful village, suddenly appeared a luxury car. It parked in front of the brick house at the end of the village. It was the house of the best magician in my village at that time. Inside the house, the magician was focusing on burning incense on the altar, preparing to go to work. Below was a middle-aged, rich-looking man sitting nervously on the ground. After burning the incense, the magician turned to the man and asked why he had come here. When the man finished listening, he began to recount in a gentle voice. The man said that lately he had been having a very scary nightmare that kept repeating for many nights, making it impossible for him to get a good night's sleep. His face was also from there, was an intense burning pain, hot as if someone was on fire in the middle of the night. His whole body was always in a state of fatigue, heavy as if someone was pressing on him. As soon as he closed his eyes to fall asleep, he saw that he was being attacked by a ragged man who looked like a beggar, rushing to attack him with an extremely aggressive attitude. The man kept grabbing his face, shouting hateful screams that made him extremely scared. In particular, he was always haunted by his horror face every time the man put his face on him. It was a face that was disfigured, with only crimson flesh, because there was no human skin. The man looked up at him with his bloodshot red eyes, his mouth moving as if he wanted to say something. Then the strange man raised his hand tightly to the rich man's face, a feeling of pain and terror now overwhelming him. Then the strange man used strong force to tear off the skin of the rich man's face, making his face look like the ghost in front of him. Because of that terrible nightmare, this rich man had been haunted for many days, to the point of not daring to sleep at night, making his health gradually weaker. He wanted to find a way to end this dream as quick as possible, so he traveled a long way from the city to come here, asking this famous magician to help. After listening to the story, the magician's face suddenly changed. He looked seriously at the man in front of him. The magician seemed to sense that the man was hiding something terrible. So, the magician went to the altar, took 3 incense sticks, recited the mantra while holding the incense, and walked around the man to find his past. The man then began to dream. His mind also gradually recalled the things that happened before. Unexpectedly, it was a barbaric story full of horror. The man's face showed his remorse as he recalled the past events. The magician stood in front of the man and looked at him sternly. His feeling was indescribable, as if the magician had known the beginning and the end of the story. Many years ago, this man knew a colleague in the company. The two were not very close, but to promote, he invited his colleague to have a meal. While drunk, the two disagreed because of disagreements. The man was angry, grabbed the bottle of wine, placed it on the table, rushed to beat the colleague. With one hand, the man grabbed his colleague by the neck. With the other, he raised his hand and slammed the bottle of wine on the head of his colleague. The sound of a bottle breaking was heard, and blood was also splattered. His colleague fell to the ground dead on the spot. The death of his colleague seemed to wake him up and realize he had just made a terrible mistake. The man was so scared he decided to leave his colleague's body lying there and then ran out alone as fast as he could. He returned to his own home, packed up his things and began to flee elsewhere. After a while, he became a man wandering the market corners. During the day, he asked for money from passerby. At night, he found a temporary corner to sleep in and constantly recalling the past time in his mind. Until one day, he went to find another wanderer on the street and took the initiative to get to know him. His purpose was to be able to return to a happy life without being wanted. This wanderer was unaware of the man's plans. He happily continued talking and drinking with the man until the middle of the night. The man purposefully made up enough stories to distract the wanderer so that he was so drunk that he was no longer conscious. After that, he waited when this vagrant was not alert. The man grabbed the bottle of wine that was placed on the table, looked at the wanderer, and prepared to take action. The wanderer was now too drunk to know anything, lying against the wall behind him to sleep. The man took the opportunity and slowly walked in front of the wanderer. He killed the wanderer and then broke his face so that no one could identify the wanderer. He decided to live with this man's identity. After taking action, he remained to search all over the wanderer's body, took all the money of the victim and identification documents to avoid finding the identity of the corpse, and blatantly started living a new life. He used his savings and the money he had stolen from the wanderer to go to a small plastic surgery clinic and had a face surgery similar to the one in the papers. He had to stay in the hospital for a long time to recover. Fortunately, the surgery was successful, and he was finally able to remove the bandages to see his new face. He happily looked at himself in the mirror, looked closely at every 5 senses on his new face, and breathed a sigh of relief when he escaped the police's pursuit. After he was done, he left and rented a small house to live in. He decided to live with his new face, work, and start a family like nothing ever happened. Meanwhile, the victims who the man killed were all found by the police and became a case that shook the country. He applied to re-enter the old company with a new name, and then he got promoted higher and higher. He became a rich man, got married, and enjoyed the high life. But since then, this nightmare had appeared in his life. After telling his story, the man expressed deep regret for the atrocities he had done before. He repeatedly begged the magician to help him, fearing that the wanderer's spirit would come and retrieve his face. The man's cruelty made the magician unable to hold back. The magician directly slapped the man's face with an angry slap as if to vent his anger on behalf of the people he killed. But the man's stupidity made him no longer rational. He thought that as long as the magician hid him, everything would be erased with no pity in his heart for the dead. Seeing this, the magician smiled and asked the man's address under the pretext of performing an exorcism. After that, this magician told him to leave, promising to help him sleep well. As soon as he left, the magician took out his phone and called the police station, telling the man's story and turning over the old murder case. The man was arrested after many years of hiding. He must be punished for the crimes he committed. At the end of the year, my neighborhood suddenly built an exhibition area. Just a few days ago, the exhibition area had quickly attracted so many people. Most of the paintings here depicted women from many different countries with different expressions and nuances. Because the exhibition area just finished building, there was still an opening position as a night shift security guard with a fairly stable salary, so I took that opportunity to apply to work here, both to earn more income and to be convenient for my studies. After discussing with the manager, who was also an old security guard, in the morning I could rest and work the night shift. Because of the nature of my job, I would usually work in the computer room to watch the security cameras, do a few rounds of preliminary checks until the middle of the night, then start taking a nap with the manager. My first day at work began. At that time it was already dark and the visitors had already left. In the exhibition area, there were only me and the older security guard. He took me on a tour around, said I knew the way here and taught me things to keep in mind when working. He took me to a gallery hidden in a far corner. This gallery wasn't mentioned before, so it made me curious. He told me this was the owner's private gallery and the duty of the security guard that night was to strictly inspect the gallery. This was strange because I had never heard of or mentioned this mysterious gallery since then. But for a newbie like me, this was not something I needed to worry about, so I just needed to take a look to know. In the middle of the night, the older security guard took me to the secret gallery, where people were not allowed to go without permission. The cold atmosphere in that place attracted me, but the security guard told me no matter what, when passing that gallery I mustn't discuss, comment or say anything, and especially I should not go in there alone. The mystery of this gallery made me even more curious. I wanted to go inside once to experience it. I asked the security guard why there were such regulations here, but before he could reply, he received a phone call that seemed important. So before he could answer my question, he said he had an important job and he had to go out. After that, he went straight out of the duty room, leaving me alone in the room with many unanswered questions. In the meantime, I scrolled through my phone in boredom, but I didn't see him back until late at night, so I made a reckless decision. I slightly looked at the clock. It was past midnight. I knew that the other security guard was busy, so I thought about going alone to be able to rest early, later. No sooner than later, I grabbed the flashlight and left the duty room alone, heading straight for the secret gallery outside. Walking a few steps, I finally reached the gallery full of mysteries. The surrounding space was also strangely dark, which made me a little cold. I couldn't take my eyes off the door of the room. There was some invisible power that kept urging me to go inside, but then I decided to turn back because I couldn't stand the cold air. I had just turned my back when suddenly a woman's giggle rang out in the room. I immediately returned to the secret gallery and assumed that someone was in the gallery. I decided to ignore the other security guard's advice. I brought the flashlight inside and carefully checked every corner of the room. But when I went inside, this room had nothing too special to attract me, but an empty room with nothing in it. Suddenly, I had the feeling that someone was watching me from behind with cold, blood-red eyes. I immediately turned around and found an oil painting hanging in the middle of the room, depicting a beautiful young girl fiddling with a favorite flower. I didn't know who the woman in this picture was, but the content of the painting was nothing special for everyone here to keep it a secret. I was impressed with the sad eyes of the girl in the picture. It seemed that in her heart there was an indescribable pain. After seeing the picture, I was going to go back to my duty room, but at that moment the girl's eyes suddenly started bleeding. The girl looked like she was crying, but her eyes were bright red, which made me scared, shaking. After a while, I felt like I was trapped in this gallery with a pool of crimson blood on the floor. It was like being drowned by the blood tears of the girl in the picture. The scene was so horrible that I couldn't forget it. The girl's tears suddenly turned fierce like a wave that wanted to rush me out of the room. After struggling for a while, I thought I would lose my life, but I woke up and found myself sitting in the room on duty without knowing it. I screamed in fear and regained my composure. The other security guard saw that I was fully awake. He sat down across from me and asked why I was alone in there and if I had seen anything strange. I didn't hide it from him and told him the whole scene that I saw in that secret gallery. I thought that he would not believe me, but he reassured me and said not only me but the people who worked in the past, anyone who entered the gallery alone had the same problem. I knew it all started with the only picture hanging in the room, so I immediately asked him the origin of that painting. The security guard originally planned not to tell me because he was worried about me and he was too afraid to think about it. So after seeing my accident, he knew he couldn't hide it anymore. The security guard told me that in the past this painting was sold by a rich businessman who liked to collect antique paintings. Many rich people hunt for a painting not because of its content or because its creator was a famous artist, but because of the paint color used to paint this picture. The artist who painted the picture was called a mad painter, a pervert with a strong passion for painting. When making this painting, the artist felt unsatisfied with his work, so he devised a new way of mixing colors to make the picture look more real. He kidnapped young girls around the same age as the girl in the picture and secretly brought them home. After that, he killed the victims and then drained the victims' blood, using it to color the paintings. He mixed the victim's blood into the palette, used it to draw the first strokes of the work. As he thought, the colors after being mixed with blood also became more vivid. In just 1 week he was able to complete the painting with emotional strokes, but with sadness and a bit of gloom. Many people also say that when painting, he would leave the victim's body behind, facing the painting as a way for the victims to see his work. The souls of the victims who were killed by him accidentally breathed their souls into the painting, making the painting famous, but also a way for the victims' souls to reside inside the painting. After finishing, he had not time to enjoy and look at his work when the police suddenly rushed in and arrested him. The artist was later sentenced to death, but the case of the painter using blood became a hot topic of discussion everywhere. The painting had since been cursed as well, but it had been hunted by many rich people and passed on from person to person. The guards were on duty at night in the exhibition area. If they went alone at night, they would be teased by the spirits of the girls in the paintings, threatened to faint, and because they were too scared, they then resigned. Therefore, the owner of this exhibition had banned anyone from going to the secret gallery alone, especially at night. The secret guard knew that I was also curious about the painting, but he specifically said that he would take me inside to see it in detail. This time, I went back. The picture was a little softer than the original, and no more strange things happened. I looked at the picture for a long time, felt the eyes of the girl in the picture as if she was watching me. After a while, the security guard took me out, ended the shift, and began to rest when it was almost morning. The painting is still there. Unfortunately, this was a beautiful work of art, but no one would admire it.